72 species had signed the Ambriel Accords, and not one of them had ever disagreed on a single scientific fact as strongly as they agreed on this one. Gravity kills that IT was the first thing taught in every biology class on every civilized world. It was printed on the first page of the Galactic Standard Reference for planetary colonization. It was so deeply embedded in the collective understanding of life across the stars that it felt like questioning whether water was wet. The number was 0.6 G. Anything above that, and carbon-based biology failed. Bones could not form properly. Hearts could not pump hard enough. Lungs could not expand against the weight pressing down on them. Cells collapsed. Organs ruptured. Nervous systems misfired under the compression. The math had been proven on Deadworld after Deadworld, each one a graveyard of organisms that had tried to evolve past the threshold and lost. Professor Delaney Reth had not invented this truth, but he had perfected it. He was Indhari. Pale blue skin stretched over a skeleton so light it would float in water. For long arms that folded neatly behind his back when he lectured. Eyes the color of frozen methane, sharp and precise. The eyes of someone who had spent 120 years turning observation into law. His published works filled an entire wing of the Ambriel Academic Archive. His gravitational models were used by colony planners across 39 systems. His name was on the theorem itself, the Reth limit, the hard biological ceiling beyond which complex life could not exist. And today, on the grandest stage in the known galaxy, he was going to present his most complete body of evidence yet. The Galactic Life Sciences Summit happened once every 70 standard years. The Grand Lecture Hall on Station Ambriel could hold 7,000 beings of varying anatomy, atmosphere, and sensory range. Sealed enclosures hummed with different gas mixtures. Translation drones circled the vaulted ceiling like silver insects, converting every word into over 900 languages. Delaney took the stage without notes. He never used them. Life is shaped by the forces that surround it, he began. Temperature, radiation, chemical availability. But no force shapes biology more directly, more brutally, and more permanently than gravity. The holographic display behind him activated. A rotating model of a standard carbon-based organism appeared, then slowly compressed as a simulated gravity value increased from 0.1 G to 0.9 G. At 0.4 G, the joints showed stress. At 0.6 G, microfractures appeared along the major bones. At 0.7 G, the heart model began to fail. By 0.9 G, the organism was a collapsed ruin of tissue and shattered structure. This is not speculation, Delaney said. This is physics applied to flesh. For the next 40 minutes, he walked the audience through 16 worlds. Each one had gravity between 0.65 G and 88 centimos. Each one had evidence of proto-life, simple organisms that had attempted to climb toward complexity and failed. Fossilized bone analogs that had cracked under their own weight. Circulatory channels too narrow to handle the pressures required. Neural bundles crushed into dysfunction. 16 worlds. 16 failures. 0 exceptions. The ceiling is not a suggestion, Delaney concluded. It is a wall. And in 120 years of study, I have never found a single crack in it. The audience responded with the polite silence that passed for applause among most galactic species. Delaney allowed himself a small nod. This was his legacy, complete and unassailable. Then a door opened at the side of the stage, and his junior research assistant, a nervous young Indhari named Sala, walked toward him with a data pad held out in front of her like a shield. "Professor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A priority transmission just came in from the deep-range vessel Quiet Reach. I am in the middle of a keynote, Sala." "I know, Professor, but the transmission is classified as first contact." The hall, which had been settling in a quiet post-lecture murmur, went completely still. Delaney looked at the datapad. He read the first 3 lines. Then he read them again. New species identified. Self-designation, human. Homeworld designation, Earth. Planetary classification, rocky terrestrial, active geology, dense atmosphere, Single large natural satellite. Surface gravity. 1.0 g. He stared at the number. The holographic display behind him was still showing the ruins of a simulated organism at 0.9 g. 1.0 g was not 0.9. It was not a marginal overshoot of his ceiling. It was nearly double the REF limit. "There is an error," he said. His voice was flat and controlled. Gravimetric sensors on long-range vessels degrade over time. The quiet reach has been deployed for 11 years. This reading is unreliable. Sala hesitated. The vessel's chief science officer confirmed the reading 3 times, "Professor." She used backup instruments. Delaney handed the pad back. "I will review the raw data personally and correct whatever calibration issue has occurred. This does not change the substance of my presentation." He turned back to the audience and delivered his closing remarks with the same steady voice he had used for the previous hour. The words came out clean and confident, but in the back of the hall, Dr. Fincha Aum did not move. She was Minari, round and soft-skinned, with wide dark eyes that missed nothing. She had studied under Delaney for 30 years. She knew his voice better than anyone alive, and she had heard the fracture in it, tiny, almost invisible, like a hairline crack in a bone that had never been stressed before. She opened her own data terminal and began downloading the quiet reach transmission. Whatever was coming, Delaney was not going to face it alone, whether he wanted company or not. 14 screens glowed in the dark of Delaney's research chamber, and every single one of them was calling him a fool. He had locked himself inside the moment the keynote ended. No visitors, no calls, no interruptions, just the raw telemetry from the quiet reach, spread across every display surface the room had, glowing like accusations written in light. He started with the gravimetric readings. If the sensors were faulty, the numbers would show drift, inconsistencies, noise in the signal. He ran diagnostic overlays, compared frequency responses, checked the calibration logs the Felwari crew had transmitted alongside the contact data. The sensors were clean. Serviced 8 months before the encounter. Operating well within tolerance. The readings were stable, repeated, and confirmed by 3 independent instruments aboard the vessel. Earth surface gravity was 1 g. There was no error to find. Delaney sat motionless in his chair for 11 minutes. He counted. It was a habit he had developed during his early research years. When a result surprised him, he would sit and count silently, giving his mind time to settle before reacting. 11 minutes was the longest he had ever counted. He moved to the planetary data next, hoping to find something that would soften the blow. Perhaps the planet was unusual in some way that created localized low-gravity pockets. Perhaps the species lived underground, shielded from the full surface pull. Perhaps there was some atmospheric buoyancy effect that reduced the effective gravitational load on surface organisms. There was none of that. Earth was a dense rocky world with a molten iron core, generating a powerful magnetic field. It had a thick atmosphere, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, which pressed down on the surface with significant weight of its own. The planet had active tectonic plates that shifted and collided, producing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions on a regular basis. It had a massive moon, nearly a quarter of the planet's own diameter, pulling at the oceans and crust with enough tidal force to reshape coastlines. This was not a gentle world with one unfortunate number. This was a world that seemed designed to destroy anything living on it. And yet, Delaney opened the biological scan files. The quiet reach had intercepted a small human vessel near the outer boundary of their solar system. The crew had been cooperative, even enthusiastic about the contact, and had consented to full biological scanning in exchange for the same from the Felwari crew. The first scan was skeletal. Delaney enlarged it and felt something cold move through his chest. Human bones were dense. Not dense the way Minari bones were dense, which was a gentle solidity evolved for stability in 0.4 g. Human bones were dense the way structural composites were dense. Layered, mineralized, reinforced at stress points, and threaded with a living repair system that actively responded to damage by making the bones stronger at the break site. Their muscles were wrapped in thick connective tissue that kept them under constant low-level tension. Even at rest, a human's muscular system was partially engaged, holding the body upright against a full gravity unit pulling it toward the ground every second of its life. Their hearts were oversized for their body mass. A single muscular organ that pumped blood at pressures Delaney's own circulatory system could not survive for 30 seconds. And it did this without pause, without rest, for an average of 70 to 80 years. This is a military organism, Delaney muttered to himself. He had said this before, during his first look at the summary data. But now, with the full scans in front of him, the word felt wrong. Military implied design, purpose, intention. These were not engineered beings. These were natural organisms. Civilians, scientists, and technicians aboard a research vessel. And their baseline biology read like a combat enhancement profile. The door chimed. Delaney ignored it. It chimed again. Then Finch's voice came through the intercom. "I am coming in, Delaney. You can lock the door again after I leave." She entered carrying a datapad and a container of something warm. She set the container on his desk without comment and sat down across from him. "The Council has officially accepted the human delegation," she said. "They arrive at Ambriel in 9 days. I heard. Have you eaten?" "I am not hungry." Finchel looked at the screens around them. She took in the skeletal scans, the cardiac models, the gravimetric data, still blinking steadily on the far wall. "Your models are correct," she said. Delaney looked at her sharply. Of all the things she could have said, that was the one he least expected. "I reviewed them myself," she continued. "Every projection, every threshold calculation, every biological limit you defined. They are accurate for every species in the Galactic Index. All 72. Then how do you explain this?" He gestured at the screens. "I do not explain it. I observe it. Your ceiling is real, Delaney. No known species can survive above 0.6 G. But humans are not a known species. They are something new, something your model never had data for because nothing like them has ever been encountered." Delaney stared at her. "You are telling me my life's work is both correct and irrelevant. I'm telling you it is correct and incomplete. There is a difference." She stood and walked to the door. 9 days, Delaney. In 9 days, you will not be arguing with data on a screen. You will be standing in a room with beings who were built by a force that should have killed them. I suggest you be ready." She left. Delaney looked at the container she had brought. He opened it. Some kind of broth. He drank it without tasting it. 9 days that he turned back to the screens. If he could not make the data disappear, then he would have to do something far more difficult. He would have to understand it. The docking clamp engaged with a sound that rumbled through the receiving bay like distant thunder rolling across a metal sky. Counselor Isek adjusted the ceremonial sash across his narrow chest and reminded himself to breathe. He was Indhari, born on a world where gravity measured 0.31 G, where a species floated through arched cities made of spun crystal and moved with a grace that other species described as almost musical. He had spent 40 years as a diplomat. He had greeted warlords, hive queens, and a sentient gas cloud that communicated through color. None of those meetings had made his stomach feel like this. The airlock cycled. The inner door slid open, and the humans stepped through. There were 5 of them. Isek's first thought was that they looked ordinary. Not monstrous, not armored, not visibly threatening. They were bipedal, upright, dressed in neat, dark uniforms with a small circular emblem on the shoulder. They had varying skin tones, hair textures, and builds, but nothing about them screamed danger. Then they started walking. IT was the weight. Not heavy in a way cargo was heavy, not the dead pull of metal or stone. It was alive. Each step landed with a certainty, a groundedness that Isek had never seen in a biological organism. The floor sensors in the receiving bay registered every footfall, and the numbers climbing on the wall display were significantly above the station's standard biological load rating. The woman in front stopped 2 paces from Isek and smiled. She was medium height by human standards, with dark brown skin, short cropped hair, and eyes that were steady and warm. "Amara Diallo," she said. "Thank you for the welcome, counselor." She extended her hand. Isek had practiced the handshake. His cultural attaché had shown him recordings. He reached out and took her fingers. Her grip was gentle. He could tell she was being careful. And even with that care, the pressure of her hand around his felt like something mechanical. Not painful, but solid in a way that his bones understood instinctively was beyond them. He withdrew his hand with practiced smoothness and inclined his head. Station Ambriel is honored to receive you, he said. The welcoming reception was held in the low-gravity social wing, set to 0.35 G for the comfort of the majority of species present. The humans entered the room and immediately changed their movement. They became lighter on their feet, almost bouncy, moving with exaggerated care the way someone might walk on an icy surface, not because they were struggling, but because they knew the ground beneath them played by different rules than the one they were built for. Isek watched from across the room as the human delegation mingled. Amara spoke with a Felwari trade delegate about mineral extraction. A broad-shouldered man named Haruto Nagai examined the structural arches of the ceiling with quiet fascination. A geologist named Priya Bundari was explaining plate tectonics to a circle of bewildered Minari academics who could not quite believe that a species would willingly live on a planet whose surface actively tried to tear itself apart. The problems began small. Haruto reached for a drink and set the glass back on the serving table. The sound was a sharp, heavy tap that made 3 nearby Inhari delegates turn their heads. The glass was designed for beings who weighed a third of what Haruto weighed. In his hand, it looked fragile. In his grip, it was a human woman named Leah Okafor laughed at something and clapped her hands together once. The sound cracked across the room like a small detonation. Several Felwari froze. A Minari counselor took a step backward. Amara yawned, covering her mouth politely, and stretched her arms above her head. The motion pulled her shoulders back, and the aliens nearest to her heard the sound her body made. Joints popping, tendons releasing. The creak and shift of a skeleton that lived under permanent mechanical load and had grown dense enough to take it. To the Inhari delegates, the sounds were not biological. They were structural. The sounds a building makes when the wind shifts. Isek typed a message under the table and sent it to the 6 senior council members observing from the gallery above. These are their civilians. They're diplomats and scientists. They're being polite. This is what Jenna looks like for them. The replies came back within seconds. Each one carried the same tone. Understood. Proceed with extreme caution. After the reception, the human delegation was escorted to guest quarters in the residential wing. The rooms had been set to 0.4 G, which was standard. Priya stepped inside and immediately steadied herself against the doorframe. It feels like walking on the moon, she said. Be careful with the furniture, Haruto said, lowering himself onto a chair slowly. The chair groaned faintly under him, but held. Everything here is built for people who weigh about 40% of what we do. Amara moved through the room, testing surfaces, adjusting her steps, learning the physics of this lighter world with a quick adaptability that seemed to come naturally to her species. Within 5 minutes, all 5 humans were moving comfortably, their steps deliberate and soft, their hands careful with every object they touched. They adapted. Just like that. Back in his office, Isek sat in silence. His aide waited by the door. Counselor, did you see the way they moved when they first entered the reception hall? Yes, counselor. They adjusted within minutes. A completely different gravitational environment, and they recalibrated their entire body mechanics in the time it takes us to finish a greeting. The aide said nothing. Isek leaned forward. They are not just strong, they are adaptable, and I am not sure which of those 2 things frightens me more. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet hum of the station around him, trying to convince himself that the floor beneath his feet was still solid. Nobody heard the seal crack. What they heard was the scream that came after that. It was a high, thin sound, the kind made by a throat not designed for shouting, pushed to its limit by pure animal terror. It came from a Felwari cargo inspector named Rida, and it cut through the metal corridors of Deck 9 like a blade through silk. Haruto Nagai was 2 sections away, examining a load-bearing wall joint that had caught his engineer's eye when the sound reached him. He turned. Through the corridor viewport, he saw the pressure indicator above cargo bay 7 switch from green to flashing amber, and then, half a second later, to solid red. The seal had blown. Emergency systems responded instantly. Bulkheads began dropping from the ceiling, each one a thick slab of reinforced composite designed to isolate compromised sections and prevent total atmospheric loss. They fell in sequence, one after another, like dominoes made of steel, and the gravity shifted. Deck 9 stabilizers, damaged by the seal failure, defaulted to their emergency setting. The standard gravity in this section had been 35 centimos. The emergency default was 0.87 G. For Haruto, the change felt like stepping off a trampoline on a solid ground. His body registered the difference immediately, adjusted his posture and stride without conscious thought, and moved on. He had been born on a planet where 1 G pressed down on him every second of every day. 0.87 G was a light afternoon. For the aliens caught in the section, it was a death sentence in slow motion. Haruto rounded the corner and found them. For beings, scattered across the corridor floor like dropped marionettes, 0.2 Indhari diplomats, their hollow bones folding under a weight nearly 3 times what their bodies were designed to bear. One was flat on his back, arms splayed, chest heaving with shallow, rapid breaths. The other was on her side, clutching her left leg where a stress fracture had already opened a visible crack along the shin, the Felwari delegate. The one who had screamed, pinned to the deck by her own body weight. All 6 limbs locked rigid, unable to lift even her head at a Minari counselor named Gaia, on her hands and knees, gray-skinned and gasping. Her cardiovascular system fighting to pump blood that now moved through her veins like thick mud. Haruto did not stop to assess. He moved out. He reached the nearest Indhari first, the male on his back. Haruto knelt, slipped one arm under the alien's shoulders and the other under his knees, and lifted. The Indhari weighed almost nothing, even at 87 centimos. Haruto carried him to the far end of the corridor where the next bulkhead had not yet dropped and set him down gently on the other side. He went back. From the opposite direction, Priya Bundari appeared at a full sprint. She had been in a geology lab 3 sections over and had followed the emergency lighting. She took in the scene without breaking stride. "How long on the bulkhead?" she called. Haruto checked the display above the descending slab at the far end. 60 seconds. Maybe less. Priya reached the Felwari first. The small alien was rigid with panic, her joints locked, her breathing shallow and erratic. Priya scooped her up and held her against her chest, one arm cradling the body, the other supporting the head. "I have you," Priya said. "Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. I have you." She carried the Felwari through the narrowing gap under the bulkhead and came back. Haruto had the second Indhari now, the female with the fractured shin. He carried her carefully, keeping the damaged leg stable, and moved fast. The alien whimpered with each step, a sound so faint and frightened that Haruto's jaw tightened. "You're almost safe," he told her. 10 more seconds. He set her down on the safe side and turned back one last time. Gaia was still on the floor. The Minari counselor had managed to raise herself to a half-sitting position, but her arms were trembling and her wide dark eyes were unfocused. Her body was failing. Her heart was not built for this. Priya reached her. "Counselor, can you hear me? I cannot, my chest, I know. Do not fight it. I'm going to carry you. Hold on to my neck if you can." Gaia's gray hands found Priya's shoulders. Priya lifted her, stood, and moved toward the bulkhead. It was halfway down now. The gap was shrinking fast. Haruto grabbed the emergency pry bar from the wall kit and jammed it into the bulkhead track. He threw his weight against it, feet braced on the floor, shoulders locked, every muscle in his back and arms engaged against the slow hydraulic descent of a slab designed to seal a pressurized section shut. The bulkhead slowed. It did not stop, but it slowed. "Now," he said through clenched teeth. Priya ducked under with Gaia in her arms. She cleared the gap by less than a hand's width. Haruto released the bar and rolled through. The bulkhead slammed shut behind him with a sound like a vault door closing on the world. He lay on the floor, breathing hard for exactly 4 seconds. Then he got up and started checking on the aliens. The station medical team arrived 6 minutes later. The Indhari female was taken for emergency bone repair. The Felwari was treated for respiratory distress and muscular lockdown. Gaia was placed on a low-gravity recovery bed with cardiac monitoring. Haruto and Priya were scanned as standard procedure. Haruto's heart rate was 11 beats above resting. Priya had a bruised collarbone from carrying Gaia. That was the full extent of their injuries. In the observation gallery above the medical wing, Delaney Reth stood with all four hands pressed flat against the glass. He had watched the security footage 3 times already. The pry bar, the carry, the sprint, the 4-second recovery. That he said nothing. He did not need to. The glass beneath his palms was fogging from the heat of his skin, and his reflection stared back at him with the hollow expression of a man watching his own monument crumble. On the first day, Delaney dismantled the math. On the second day, he rebuilt it. On the third day, he sat in the wreckage of both and stared at what was left. His research chamber looked like a storm had passed through a library. Holographic projections overlapped in midair, some frozen, some still cycling through simulations he had abandoned hours ago. Data pads lay scattered across every surface. A half-eaten nutrient bar sat on top of a projection lens, casting a faint shadow across a cardiac output model that no longer made sense. He had tried everything. He had rerun his gravitational ceiling calculations from scratch. He had rebuilt the bone density failure curves using raw data from 30 years of colony surveys. He had pulled medical records from 16 species and stress-tested their organ systems against increasing gravitational loads, looking for any hidden elasticity, any overlooked capacity that might explain how a species could survive at 1.0 G. There was none. His models worked perfectly for every species in the Galactic Index. Every curve, every threshold, every failure point landed exactly where his equations predicted. The Reth limit was real. No known biology could function above 0.6 G. The problem was not the science. The problem was a species that had walked through his science like it was an open door that on the morning of the third day, Fincha came without knocking. She had done this enough times now that Delaney no longer protested. She carried her data pad under one arm and a calm expression that he found irritating specifically because it suggested she had already arrived at a conclusion he was still fighting. "Sit down," she said. As if it were her office, he sat, mostly because his legs were tired. "I have been compiling data from the Human Cultural Archives," Finchas said. "They opened them freely during the diplomatic exchange. Historical records, biological studies, recreational documentation. All of it unclassified. I have seen the biological data. You have not seen this." She placed the pad in front of him and opened a file marked Physical Recreation and Competitive Sport. Delaney looked at the first entry and felt the room tilt slightly. Humans ran. Not for migration, not to escape predators, not for any survival function that Delaney could identify. They ran for enjoyment. They organized mass events where thousands of individuals ran 42 kilometers across open terrain in full 1G, often in extreme heat, and they did this voluntarily. They called it a marathon. They had been doing it for over 2,000 years. The next entry was worse. Humans lifted heavy objects, not to move them from one place to another, but to see how much weight their bodies could support. The strongest among them raised over 300 kilograms from the ground to above their heads. They trained for this. They competed at it. They celebrated the ones who could lift the most. Delaney scrolled further. His 4 hands had gone very still. Humans climbed vertical rock faces using their fingers and toes. They swam through liquid water, which on their world was dense and resistant for recreation. They jumped from high places attached to elastic cords and called it fun. They fought each other with padded hands in enclosed spaces while crowds watched and cheered. "These are not soldiers," Finchas said. "These are ordinary civilians performing these activities in their free time." Delaney said nothing. He kept reading. Humans carry their young, not in low-gravity cradles or suspension harnesses, but in their arms against their bodies for hours at a time. A standard human infant weighed between 3 and 5 kilograms. A parent would hold that weight against their chest while walking, climbing stairs, preparing food, and managing other tasks. They did this daily for years and considered it normal. Their elderly, Fincha continued, experience bone density loss as they age. Their medical literature treats this as a disease. Do you understand what that means? Delaney understood. It meant that the baseline state for a healthy human was bone density so high that its natural decline with age was classified as a medical condition. A density that, for any other species in the galaxy, would be considered pathologically reinforced. He put the pad down. My models are not wrong, he said. He had said this before, but the tone was different now. It was no longer defensive. It was the voice of someone standing at the edge of a cliff and acknowledging, quietly, that the ground had been real all along, and so was the drop. No, Finch said. Your models are not wrong, but they are not complete. No, they are not. Delaney leaned back. The chair creaked under him, a sound that, for a brief, absurd moment, reminded him of the way the human's joints had cracked during the welcoming dinner. I need to address the summit, he said. Fincha exhaled. 3 days she had waited. 3 days of watching him fight the data, fight himself, fight the weight of a career that meant everything to him. And now, in 6 quiet words, he had let it go. I will make the arrangements, she said. You will have the Grand Lecture Hall. Full attendance is already guaranteed. The entire galaxy is watching. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. What will you say? Delaney looked at the holographic wreckage around him. The models, the curves, the beautiful, precise architecture of a century of work. All of it still standing. All of it still correct. And all of it too small. I will say what the data demands, he said. I will say that we were right about everything except the one thing that mattered most. Finch nodded and left him alone with the ruins of his certainty and the rough shape of something larger beginning to form in its place. 9,400 beings filled the Grand Lecture Hall, and not one of them made a sound. Overflow galleries had been opened for the first time in living memory. Secondary viewing halls across Station Ambriel were broadcasting the session live. The feed was being transmitted to 360 worlds across the galactic network, and unofficial estimates suggested that nearly 2 billion individuals were watching in real time. Everyone knew what was coming. No one knew exactly what it would sound like. Delaney Reth walked to the podium with a steadiness that surprised even himself. He had not slept the night before. He had spent the hours instead sitting in his darkened chamber, staring at the ceiling, letting the words arrange themselves in his mind like bones settling into place after a fracture. He placed all 4 hands on the podium. He looked out at the audience. Indhari, Felwari, Minari, and dozens of other species, all watching him with the kind of focused attention that only came when something foundational was about to shift. 14 days ago, he began, I stood on this stage and delivered what I believed to be the definitive statement on gravitational biology. I told you that the 0.6 G ceiling was absolute. I told you it was a wall. I told you I had never found a crack in it. He paused. I was correct about the wall. I was wrong about the universe. He let the silence hold for 3 seconds, then continued. I am formally retracting my thesis. Not because the data was wrong, but because the data was incomplete. I built a framework based on every known species in the Galactic Index, and that framework is accurate for every one of those species. But I made an assumption that no scientist should make. I assumed that what I had measured was all there was to measure. He gestured, and the holographic display came to life. But this time, instead of failure projections and fossilized ruins, it showed something new. A biological classification diagram with a new category at the top, outlined in sharp white light. I am proposing a new classification. High-gravity apex organisms. This category describes species that did not survive extreme gravity through adaptation or compromise, but were fundamentally constructed by it. Species for whom gravity was not an obstacle, but a forge. The display expanded. The human biological profile appeared beside the 17 species Delaney had spent a century studying. The visual contrast was immediate and brutal. Where other species showed elegance and efficiency, structures minimized to conserve energy in gentle gravitational fields, the human profile showed density, reinforcement, and raw mechanical power. Human bones are nearly twice as dense as the galactic average for carbon-based species. They contain a living repair system that responds to fractures by reinforcing the breakpoint, making the bone stronger than it was before the damage. Their skeletal structure is not delicate architecture. It is load-bearing infrastructure. He advanced the display. Their muscular system operates under constant baseline tension. Even at rest, their muscles are partially engaged, maintaining posture against a full gravitational unit. Their resting state is our moderate exertion. Their moderate exertion is our physical limit. Their physical limit is beyond anything in our biological records. Another advance. Their cardiovascular system operates at pressures that would rupture the vascular walls of any species in this hall. A single organ, the heart, pumps continuously for 70 to 80 years without rest, without maintenance, without interruption. He stepped back from the data and faced the audience directly. 3 days ago, 2 humans carried 4 of our delegates to safety during a structural failure on Deck 9. The section's gravity had defaulted to 87 centimos. For our people, this was a medical emergency. For the humans, it was an inconvenience. One of them bent a steel emergency bar with his bare hands to hold open a bulkhead. The other carried a Minari counselor at a full sprint. Their post-incident medical scans showed a slightly elevated heart rate and a bruise. He let that settle. These were not soldiers. They were a research engineer and a geologist. These were their ordinary people performing ordinary acts in conditions that nearly killed our best. He folded 2 arms behind his back. I want to be precise about what I am saying. I'm not issuing a warning. Humans are not aggressive. Every interaction during their visit has demonstrated patience, curiosity, generosity, and a remarkable gentleness that is all the more striking when you understand the physical power behind it. They shared their data freely. They asked for nothing. They saved our people without hesitation. He looked across the 9,000 silent faces. But I would be failing in my duty as a scientist if I did not state clearly what the data shows. A species forged by 1G is the most physically resilient form of life this galaxy has ever produced. They are stronger than us. They are more durable than us. They heal faster, endure longer, and operate under conditions that would destroy any other known organism. And they consider all of this normal. They do not see themselves as exceptional. They see themselves as ordinary. He straightened. That may be the most remarkable thing about them. He reached for his closing. We built our understanding of life around a limit. That limit is real. But beyond it, in a place we never thought to look, something grew. Something that took the worst force the universe could offer and turned it into strength. We were not wrong about what gravity can do. We were wrong about what life can become. He stepped back from the podium. The hall erupted, not with sound, but with the layered, overlapping expressions of approval from dozens of species. Clicks, hums, rhythmic tapping, resonant tones, and colors shifting across bioluminescent skin. I in the back row. Amara Diallo leaned toward Haruto Nagai. What was the last line of his published paper? My translator dropped it. Haruto checked his communicator and read it quietly. We assumed gravity was a barrier. For humans, it was a teacher. Amara smiled. She sat back in her chair, a chair built for someone half her weight, on a station 1,000 light years from home, and let the galaxy take its time.